So welcome, everyone. We're back together again. This is Diane Chase, and you were joining us for what we call the CRRSA final report. Just in case you need to know the whole word, it's the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. And this is how to complete your final report. I think you're going to be really happy today when we go through, because I've completely changed course over the last 48 hours on what we're going to do, and we're making it even simpler and easier to access. So today, our completing your final CRRSA report is from the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, and it's hosted by Child Care Aware of New Hampshire and the lovely Donna Lake. And let's get rolling. Couple logistics today. Everybody's muted, as Donna said, so we can hear well. If you're having any issues, please call or text Donna at CCRRSA training at Southern New Hampshire Services. It's snhs.org, or you can put it in the chat as well. And this is being recorded. We already started the recording, even though it'll say it's starting in a minute, and it will be available very quickly on the New Hampshire Connections website, as well as a follow-up email with the link. So a couple more logistics. If you'd like professional development hours, please be sure to put your name of your full name and your program name in the chat today, and we'll make sure that you get those. You can, if you're participating by phone, you can also send an email to that same email address, ccrr@snhs.org. Same thing, name of your program and your full name, but also mention that you were on the CRRSA webinar, since we've got quite a few coming up. Comments, as we said, we're going to take your questions. So, and if there's a comment related to it that's related to a question, put that in the chat. Donna's going to assist us with capturing those questions so we can use those for the frequently asked questions. That's why we're limiting the access to it today. And we'll have plenty of time for live chats during our virtual office hours, which we'll be talking about later. We already started the recording. So let's get rolling. This is where it will be posted, as well as in a link to an email that I'll be sending out to you. If for some reason you are not getting emails from me, please make sure that you put the, you'll see a grant help desk link. Make sure that you stick an email in there that says, hey, I'm not getting your emails. Maybe you're a new person, maybe when you typed in your email address, which is where I take it from, maybe it was incorrect. So make sure that you're getting what we're sending out. So let's talk about what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, what are our goals and our agenda for today? So we're going to be talking about a quick overview of the grant, just so you remember which one it is. I know there's been a lot of acronyms. There's been a lot of funding. Also going to tell you some of the materials you're going to get that will help you remember which one's which. We're going to talk about the final report and how we've narrowed it down to one simple tool, and then also how to allocate your funds, as well as the resources that are available. And then I'll be answering as many questions as possible. So first of all, let's talk about the grant. You all remember this grant came out in the spring of 2021. It was in the midst of the coronavirus. And so it's really focused on the COVID itself and helping programs in that second phase after the emergency, which a lot of us still felt like we were in an emergency, but that the emergency response, and this was the beginning of that climb towards somewhat stabilization and normalcy. As you recall, we all foolishly thought when it first happened in March of 2020 that by the fall, things would be normal. And we thought by the fall of 2021, they would be normal. And they were a little bit more normal then. But we're still addressing a lot of COVID issues now. So what was the purpose of the CRRSA funds? So the intended purpose was to provide resources to address the immediate needs of families struggling to pay for child care and child care providers facing financial uncertainty due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Remember that we started out with the CRRSA money, which came through the governor's office. And this also was a pass-through from the governor's office. You had to do a plan submitted to your governor, as well as submitted to the Office for Child Care. And the CRRSA funds were used for a wide variety of things. They were used for absent due to COVID. They were used for the direct care grants. They were used from some specific supports for essential workers in the areas of hospitals and first responders. So the money went a long way to do a lot of good things, with the bulk going to all of you. Now, what was the goal? Healthy and safe and stable services, help with ongoing program recovery and stabilization, building a stronger childcare infrastructure by keeping childcare in business and supporting families. So when I first talked about the final report, we were going to do a SurveyMonkey based questionnaire and then also a spreadsheet. But after some discussions with our federal partners, looking at the time constraints and really looking at the reporting requirements, I was able to narrow it down to one simple tool. First of all, it will not be SurveyMonkey based. And it will be a Word document that you can type into at your leisure. And it will be a really simple reporting. So what's it going to look like? So I'm going to ask you basic info. I'm not going to ask you huge questions or charts like we do with ARPA, which we have much heavier reporting requirements, but I'm going to ask you at a point in time, what was your enrollment? Were you a child care scholarship provider? Some of the real basics, but not any big charts, not a breakdown of staff and how much they were getting paid an hour, none of those things. Those things will capture primarily in ARPA, and we have a lot of that information. And so really I'm looking in the basic information is who are you? What's your program name? Who's the contact? Those basic things. So you won't spend a lot of time on that. Then you're going to do a spending by category. And that is going to be, these are the categories that you're going to see. And it will ask you, and I just want to remind you, and we'll talk more about how you allocate your funds. You did not have to spend money in all of these areas. These were the areas that you could spend your money in. Bear in mind, just remember that this money was intended for COVID relief. So that's what you're going to keep asking yourself. What did I spend this money on that related to COVID? So it's income losses, staffing and personnel expenses, and we'll go more into what these mean, occupancy or operating and occupancy costs, materials and supplies related to COVID. This is key right here, related to COVID. Equipment and services related to COVID, staff development and training to support staff and families, parent fees to offset tuition for essential and unemployed families. And I will put under as a caveat as we move on, again, this essential families is how we define those vulnerable families. Those were essential and critical. And impact of funds on your staff and families. So what does this look like? Here's a sample of a financial question. So let's say we're in staffing and personnel expenses, and you spent $145,500 in that particular category. So the question right after that will be, describe how you utilize the fund by subcategory. So how in staffing and personnel expenses did you use it? Well, I used it for staff wages and benefits for 17 staff, or 17 direct care, 2 management, and should be 1. I'll add that right there. Oops, sorry. Should be 1 financial person. To the tune of between May and July of 2021 to the tune of 100,000. I did staff development, paid for an online COVID protocol and procedure workshop for 20 of my staff to the tune of little over $4,000. And then I did staff retention bonuses. So this is what you're going to answer. Now, I can hear some of you thinking, well, but that's not a lot of information to have to put in there. No, it's not. I want to emphasize over and over that the likelihood that this COVID money all across the nation is going to be audited at some point. I certainly know we will be audited because of the basic requirements within DHHS and the state, but also they'll do spot auditing of your programs. And so they will randomly pick somewhere, they do usually 30 to 50 programs, and they will come out and they will have your final report and they will say, okay, Diane Chase, show us your staff wages and benefits, show us that staff development course, where did you buy it from? So while I don't want the individual receipts, while I don't need the individual name of each of the companies and that sort of thing, you will be responsible for keeping that accounting and that detail, which I know you do anyway. So my suggestion is, if you don't already have a system, literally just develop a series of folders that you've dropped in these expenses, and then you can refer back to them in the event that you're audited. Also, you can refer back to them as you're doing your taxes. So it's that simple, literally. Then the second section is what we call the impact narrative. And this is the place where you get to shine and talk about what you did. And I want to emphasize here also, we provide this information in what's called an aggregate form. So it's not, when we put out final reports, yes, it's public information and somebody can see what, specifically programs spent and put in final reports. But in terms of us reporting to the federal, to the governor's office and things like that, we put together a comprehensive overview of the reports. So don't worry about wordsmithing here. Some of you are absolutely fantastic writers and you're going to write 10 pages, and some of you are more comfortable with doing bulleted things. As long as it is clear in your response, that is the most important thing, because we'll be taking snippets of that. But the question that they have for us and we have for you is, how did the CRRSA funds positively impact your program? And then looking at these, the four primary focuses of or goals of the program, how did the funds positively impact you in these areas? So how did the funds help you provide and maintain healthy and safe and stable services, childcare services, ongoing program recovery and stabilization, build a stronger childcare system infrastructure, and help support families? Now, no, you don't have to answer every single one of these. So for you, let's just say you are I can think off of almost actually anything that you spent money on would positively answer each one of these. But let's just say that you used 100% of your funds for income losses. Well, what did that do? It helped you provide and maintain a healthy and safe and stable services because you stayed in business, right? You were able to continue to provide the same level of services because you were able to capture back some of the losses that you had while programs were closed or while families were unable to attend your program or pay. It helped with the ongoing program recovery and stabilization. That's obvious. And certainly it probably helped families because you didn't end up having to charge families for the time that you were closed. Now, I do want to put a caveat that, remember that when we're going to talk about income losses, that you can't have double dipped. You can't have charged families and recovered income losses. So keep that in mind. And you may say, well, how did it help build a stronger childcare system infrastructure? And you may not answer that one. On the other hand, you may say, hey, you know what? Because I stayed in business, it kept us, let's just say I'm located in an area where there's not a lot of childcare centers, that it kept us in business and it kept us able to help provide families with services in this area, and therefore, in the long run, helping the statewide infrastructure, which is the access to childcare throughout the state, quality childcare. It helped us stay in business and keep that programs provided and ongoing in our area. Again, don't feel like you have to answer all of these. Answer the ones, at least one, that fit into your spending. So if you think of it in simple terms, if we were having a discussion, I'd say, so you got $50,000 for CRRSA funds, and I see that you spent it on staffing and you spent it on the additional cleanings for your program and a new front door system, so that there was a barrier between the coming inside the program and when parents arrived, so that we would have time to keep families separated and not take the chance of spreading COVID. And those are your primary things. Then take a look and say, where did that fit in these goals, and answer those. So this is one of those times where I say the more is better. But don't feel like you've got to say this money helped us in all of these areas. If you felt that it only helped you in one, if you used your funds strictly to help families, that is okay. Write it under that. But also reflect on how it impacted the others as well. And that's the entire report. No spreadsheet, no survey monkey, no tons of data. You're focusing on what you did with the money and how it impacted your program. So when is it due? It's due February 10th in 2023, which I can't believe it's 2023, at 11:59 p.m. That's when they will all need to be submitted. You'll be submitting them as an attachment to email. For those of you that are a touch technologically challenged, I've already had questions. Can I mail it in? Absolutely, you can mail it in. I will put it on the template. The expectation is that is a Friday, so it needs to be postmarked by no later than that Saturday, because I expect it to be in the mail by Monday. So I think it's Friday. I say that with such confidence. I hope it is. So it needs to be postmarked by February 11th at the latest. And the other question I was asked, can you handwrite it? Yes, you can handwrite it if I can read your handwriting. I am okay with that. If you're somebody that's more comfortable writing the narrative parts on lined paper, that is okay. The ideal way for me to receive it will be by email, typed into a Word document template. And when you submit it, we're going to ask you to, if you can, save it as a PDF. And then attach it to an email. There will be an address right on the template, and you can send it into there. And that way you'll have a copy, we'll have a copy, and you will have satisfied the requirements for CRRSA. So that's how simple the report is. So let's jump over on how to allocate your funds. So remember that when you did the application, I believe we talked about in the application how you might spend your funds. You don't need to refer back to your application. You can look at it by going into your NHCIS portal and into the grant tile. If for some reason you can't see it, refer to the informational memo that you got about how to request reports through our grant help desk, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it is not necessary. That was how people thought they might spend money in any of these grant reports, the quality, the CRRSA, and the ARPA. Those were projections, those were estimates. How you actually spent it, as long as it aligned with the allowable expenses, that is perfectly okay. As you're thinking about how to allocate your expenses, remember to look back at this phraseology. This is directly from the Fed. This is for any activities that are allowable under the Act and the regulations, as long as the activities relate to preventing, preparing for, and responding to COVID-19. That's pretty broad. So if you've got any questions, again, you just submit a help desk question, or you come to virtual office hours and say, what about? And there's a lot of leeway in that, and there's a lot of creativity in that. So how could they have been used in a general sense? They could have been used for income losses from March 1st, 2020. Remember the first document we sent out, we made an error and we misunderstood what the Fed said, and we put March 1st, 2021. It's not. It's income losses from March 1st, 2020, right through September 30 of 2022. It's also for COVID-related expenses during that same period. Funds needed to be spent or allocated by September 30th. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't go back now and say, okay, this applies to CRRSA, this applies to CRRSA. What it does mean is that if you have expenses that you incurred after September 30th, 2022, that they cannot be included in allowable expenses for CRRSA. Again, like I said, you couldn't use these funds for expenses or income losses that you already recovered or covered with other funding. So keep that in mind. So if you charged your families for times when you were closed or when they weren't there, you cannot count that as income losses. Or if you already put it in CRRSA or CAS or the absent due to COVID or school age billing, PPP, those sort of things. And they should be used to continue to stabilize your program, and your families should have been used. So what that means is you didn't have to pay tuition with it, but look at the key words here, which is stabilizing your program as well as stabilizing your families. So as again, you look at what expenses that you're going to include, bear in mind that they meet this criteria. Now let's talk about those specific categories you're going to be reporting on. There were employee wages and one-time bonuses, all under those staffing expenses. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, what about our overhead? We're a larger organization. That would go under your operating and occupancy costs. So it wouldn't necessarily, unless it's a direct correlation. So for example, in employee wages, if you paid for part of the bookkeeper's wages and not other overhead expenses, then you would put it in employee wages. But if you paid for, if you were part of a larger entity, like a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA, or let's say, even if you're in part of a church and the church provides you with, bookkeeping services and management services, any of those sort of things, that would go under the operating. And use those funds wisely. You don't want to have a disproportionate amount paid to overhead and not paid to, again, going back to that idea of stabilizing your program and your families and supporting them. Income losses, like we said, March 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2022. You'll remember how we did those formulas before. That is income that you would have gotten if you had been open and it had been regular times. And what we're finding is with the spot audits that have been done, what they do is they go back and they look at what your occupancy would be at a sampling of a number of times. So for example, if you're saying that you're taking your income losses for April of 2020, they're going to go back and look at how many children that you had enrolled in April of 2019, and use that as an approximate amount of income that you should have received, and then balance that against what you said your losses were. So keep that in mind. Now, I know some of you had newly opened programs, that's not the only thing that they look at when they're looking at income losses, and there's an ability for you to talk through it. But they also will look at where you were in January of 2020. And so just keep in mind that you need to have that kind of information, again, in that little file folder, electronic or not, that helps explain, how did I come up with income losses? Operating and occupancy costs beyond the usual costs. Remember, those are things where that are COVID related. So if it's your standard operating and occupancy costs, yeah, you pay your mortgage and you pay this and pay that. But a lot of you had increases. You had increases in everything from the cost of electricity to additional occupancy costs because landlords did things. So anything that is beyond the usual cost that was related to COVID, and we're meant to support you and keep you in business. So again, if you have questions about those, and I failed to mention this earlier, but I will say it now, we are doing individual webinars that will cover each one of these categories. There's not a webinar for each one. I think we can do 2 or 3 at a time. Go back and look at the informational memo that was sent out. It'll also be posted on the New Hampshire Connections website, and that will tell you when you can pop onto to that webinar, or what webinar to listen to, where we talk about specifically the ARPA, CRRSA, and quality individual, if you will, budget line items or expense line items here, and what they mean and what they can be used for. That being said, there's always something that you all come up with that I haven't thought about before, or I haven't investigated. And that's why it's great having such a super relationship with our federal partners, because all I have to do is reach out and say, hey, do you think this is covered? Do you think this is part of it? And because we've had multiple grants now, it may work in one and not in another. So for example, in here, you can do the, you could pay for tuition, parent fees and things like that to help offset the tuition, where in ARPA, as you recall, you can't pay for anything to do with tuition. Another category, materials or supplies related to COVID. Again, this is a really general category. You might be thinking, well, we bought special sanitizing things, we bought masks, we bought XYZ to keep the place cleaner. But also, don't forget all those individual little kits of crayons and other materials and additional materials that you bought so that children weren't sharing things like they usually do. That counts. And the bins that you bought to put that stuff in, as well as materials and supplies related to your staff. A number of programs bought things like, not only did they buy masks and things like that for the staff, but they bought aprons that their staff hadn't worn before, and bought quite a few of them so they could keep them clean, to make sure that their staff were able to carry around additional cleaning supplies or things that they might possibly need. So again, be creative, think outside the box, try to remember back what you were doing then. Also, you could do staff development or training to support staff and families during and post-COVID. So, and post-COVID is, honestly, it's whenever you decided it was post-COVID in your program. But if you want to use a date, it's when, and I'll have to look it up, it's when the governor lifted the emergency order, would technically be when what we call the post-COVID period. And again, be generous on your staff development. It isn't just staff development related to COVID. It was staff development that was related to helping you support your staff and families. For example, I know quite a few of you saw a lot of really challenging behaviors when kids started to come back after being home from anywhere from a month to 6 months. And so you had additional staff training and staff development, bringing in experts to help your staff figure out better ways to address those challenging behaviors and help integrate kids back into program. But it also counts as staff wellness, is staff development. So things that you did that you may have brought in a yoga instructor, before the beginning of the day or after the end of the day to support your staff in being able to relax and those sort of things. Under the parent fees to offset tuition, especially for essential workers and unemployed families, it's not limited to those groups. Notice that. It is how you supported families with those parent fees to offset the tuition. So it may be that you didn't charge families for times when they weren't at the program because they were unemployed, or when they had to work extra hours because they were a grocery store worker, or they were a first responder, or because the organization they worked for was short-staffed, and traditionally they would only have their children in your program 3 days a week, but they ended up having to work 5 days a week. So again, this allows you to really step back and say, how did we offset those? And again, make sure that you are not double or triple dipping. If you're going to do income losses, you can't also have put the money towards parent fees. And it must be related to COVID-19. That's the big thing. And again, the federal government kept saying to us, think relief, recovery, and stabilization. How did this money help do that? These were some of the questions I just pulled out of one of our previous discussions. So what about certain areas? Employee wages beyond regular staff costs, and would be things like increases that you gave staff, and then one-time bonuses, extra staffing hours, adding extra staff because you broke kids' groups into smaller groups. The income losses we talked about, the operating and occupancy costs beyond the usual costs. Like I said, it's look at your electric bill in 2019 and then look at your electric bills in 2021. We all know the difference. And that difference is what you're putting towards the CRRSA grant. So not the full electric bill, but but what was the difference in the costs? Same thing with things, we always use the toilet paper example. We all know that, if you bought a roll of toilet paper in February of 2020, and then you bought a roll of toilet paper even in April of 2020, it was substantially more. So look at what your box rate was for that, and how much more you paid for materials and expenses. So again, above and beyond the usual costs. Materials and supplies related to COVID, again, we talked about that, the staff development, and the tuition for parents. So there's be creative and ask a lot of questions. Now, what are some of the resources that you have? The template for the report, since literally was this morning redesigning it to make it simpler, will be up on the New Hampshire Connections website. We're going to kind of strip out that financial resources page and make it real clean. So it will be there by Friday at the latest. We'll also be putting up the allowable use charge, the FAQs, the virtual office hour schedule. I'm also going to put up that memo that we sent out that had details in it. I'll make the changes, the update changes to what some of the report information. And I'm going to ask you not to email us questions. We have a grant report help desk that we've established. Many of you have been using it. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it and how much easier it is. The volume of emails is really, really, really high. We're doing our best, but especially over the holidays, being able to respond to those. So you just pop a question in that help desk link. It's on SurveyMonkey. Again, don't wordsmith it, put the basics in, say, this is my question, or this is what I need a copy of. And then what I'm trying to do is every night go through those and then respond with an email to folks and just say, hey, this is what I'm doing, or attaching what you need to know. Now, the other thing that we are working on, and the lovely Karima is doing it for us, is we have a report that has come from our finance folks, and some of you have already gotten it because you had requested some information, and it shows all of the funds that have been distributed to you for CRRSA, ARPA, the CCDF, discretionary quality incentive, and if you got NHEYP. There's very few of you that overlap, a couple of you, but most of you, that's the middle school and high school program, so that doesn't impact most of you. But you will get an email, and on that email, it will have not only the link to the help desk, but it will also have a chart embedded right there in the email that shows a summary by each grant and then the total amount. And there's two reasons that we're sending that to you. Having been a director and having done a lot of grants in my lifetime, I know how confusing it can be, and especially if you're getting a check that either mailed or you're getting an electronic deposit, and you look at the remittance and it says CRRSA. Well, we paid for absent due to COVID with CRRSA as well. So you have to sort of look at the detail to figure it out. This way, all of you will have a summary of what funding that you have received. The other thing that's really important about that is to look at that and make sure that you received it. Because there was a lot of funds going out in a very fast time period and over a time with multiple invoices. And we just had a very alarming discovery with a program the other day. They had been waiting to get their quality incentive funds. They had assumed that that we were backed up because of the volume, but the check had actually been sent out in October to them, and it had been not only had been gone out, but the check was stolen, and it was deposited cashed and deposited by what law enforcement feel is an organized group that steals checks from not just from childcare centers, from any place they can get a hold of them, send them out of state, and then cash them. We never would have known that if that program hadn't done their due diligence and said, hey, I think we're missing some money here. And then we go back, we look, we say, yep, it got mailed out. It could have just been simply lost in the mail. But instead, this was not lost in the mail and was stolen. So please take a look at it. We will be happy on our end to do the research. Again, that's a place where you put the query is in that help desk. Just say, hey, I saw when you sent me the report, Diane, that there is that I was supposed to receive, $1,200 for XYZ. I don't show that anywhere in my records. Then we backtrack. It takes a little bit of time because part of it's done in DHHS and the rest is done through Treasury for the state. And we have to do some digging to find out, if it's number one, if it's been cashed, and then if it has been cashed, when was it cashed, and then do the research from there. But together we want to make sure that everybody got the funds that they were supposed to get and when they were supposed to get them. So that is soup to nuts, everything that I have to tell you about the report. It is, like I said, it's simple, it's down and dirty. I don't want you to wordsmith it. If you need to handwrite it, I totally get it. There'll be an address. You'll be sending it to me personally, so it'll be in my hands. Then we'll be assembling the data. We're going to share the results publicly, again, in an aggregate form, not with your individual name, but it will definitely be it will definitely be easier than ARPA, which is a little more complex and a little more data. It has a spreadsheet. And it will be right in line with what we're going to be asking for the quality report as well. So I know I talked fast. That's why we recorded it. I'm now going to stop talking and I'm going to ask Donna to share some of the questions with me, please.
So some of the questions I believe you answered when you discussed the email going out and what is going to be part of that. There's a question for organizations with multiple sites. Do we do one report for each site?
No, you will have, you will do one report that will talk about all sites, and there'll be a place for you to say this includes all sites. Now, if you've got some really distinct things that are going on and you want to, and you do want to share those, then feel free. You know, if you have 3 sites and you want to do 3 reports, or if you have, 20 sites and you want to do 19 on one report and do one set aside, that's fine. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that for those multi-sites, in your reporting, you can move your money and your expenses around to your different sites. So it doesn't have to be, since we did those as multi-site applications, and that actually will go with the other ones as well. If let's just say you got $100,000 in $20,000 increments to your 5 programs, but you end up spending $30,000 at one and $10,000 at the other, that's perfectly fine. There'll be a place for multi-sites to talk about that. And what I don't know if I mentioned this, but also you'll get an email with the template attached as well. So you don't have to go online to get the template. It'll just be there as a backup. So that will happen as well. And those multi-site folks, you're going to get your own special version. It's not immensely different. It's just make sure that I know it's a multi-site. What else, Donna?
We gave our staff weekly bonuses for retention, not a one-time bonus. Are all of the weekly bonuses eligible?
Absolutely. Yep. Most certainly. Because my gut feel is we probably wouldn't have been giving out bonuses had we not had COVID. So certainly.
When you talk about income losses due to closure, many of us didn't close, but had a severe reduction in enrollment due to COVID. Is that included in income loss, reduced enrollment?
Absolutely. Yep. So if you think about, we'll take Chase's childcare, and customarily I serve 100 children, but during COVID, I ended up only serving 50 children. Then the income that I would have captured from those 50 children is an income loss. Absolutely.
I have under my CRRSA notes that we were able to use these funds towards playground projects, but this isn't listed. Can you please confirm that?
Yes, and let me put the a little bit different from ARPA, where you could just use it in general for a project. Sorry, I just turned my camera on. I didn't realize I had it off. Whereas this one, you would say the explanation of the impact was that you yes, you did it for playground renovations in order to create a healthier environment, because it allowed you to spread out the kids more, as opposed to when you do your ARPA stabilization, you can just have upgraded or improved or repaired your playground because it needed it. So that's the difference between the 2 grants.
Does this include free staff childcare in the program?
Yes, this one does. Yep.
Is the grant response help? I'm going to assume that's desk. Also in New Hampshire connections for us to just click quickly, or no, the help link.
Yeah,
So,
it isn't yet, but it's going to be. So that's I'm going to clean up that COVID related finance with my childcare aware partners, and we're going to clean that up, and it will be very prominent on the page. So yes, you'll be able to click it right there.
And so the email that you're sending out, this person also wanted to know, would the link be in that email and the funds granted to us?
Yes, actually, what I'm going to try to do is every email I send to you from now on will have that link to that help desk. Like I said, Kareem is starting to work on to work her way through the summaries of sending you all of the summary of the expenses. And if for some reason right now you're thinking, well, I'm not 100% sure that Diane has the right email address, I would recommend 2 things. One, go into that help desk and send me your updated email. and also do the make sure that you go into NHCIS and update your, not in your personal, but in your, if you're a program director, update your email correctly, because when I get in a bind and I can't find somebody, that's where I go to first, which is I go to childcare licensing. And every time I send an email out to all of the licensed childcare programs, I get about 45 to 50 back with incorrect addresses. And those are based on what you all type in, not what we type in. So what next, Donna?
Is there a timeline on when you expect those emails to go out to the programs for funding?
Yes, where she's starting working on them this afternoon. And so the goal is that we're going to work on them Thursday, Friday, we're out on Monday. And so Tuesday, my goal is that all of you would have them by Tuesday, end of business on Tuesday. Again, it's pretty quick. There's just a lot of them there. She's going to have to send out, let's see, I think when I counted 620, I think, emails. So we will slog through them as quickly as possible.
Does this mean that COVID absent will be embedded in the CRRSA amount, or will it be picked out to show grant versus absentee money?
You won't see the absent due to COVID on the report that you get. So all you're going to see is the CRRSA money, the CRRSA grant money that's on the report that you get, just shows the, it'll say, it says CRRSA and the amount that you got paid for 2 invoices for the CRRSA grant. Then it'll say ARPA, what you got to pay, ARPA round 1, ARPA round 2. And then it will say, I think it says CCDF, DISC, which is discretionary quality, and it'll say that. And then it shows you what was paid out in 1 or 2 of those payments. And actually it shows 2 payments, but it's because one is the infant and toddler and one is the regular. You got 1 check, but so the answer to the question is no, you don't have to worry about confusing your absent due to COVID money with the CRRSA grant money, because you won't even get a report that says that. And this does not replace your 1099 that you get from the state. So that's separate. I don't touch that one.
Replacing carpets with flooring to alleviate easier cleaning as in when children sneeze, etc. That
absolutely. Yep. A lot of you did that.
For the free staff childcare, is that time frame March 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2022?
Yes.
To be clear, free staff childcare is eligible under CRRSA, but not ARPA.
Correct. Yep. So as you recall, if you, in your ARPA, you said, yes, we're going to provide free childcare, we put some additional funds in your account, but they couldn't be used for that. It was just to offset some of your operating costs so you could allocate some of your other monies, or your, if you will, income towards that. But CRRSA is a way to recapture some of that money.
And that is it that I can see for questions. I will save this chat though and send it to you, so you'll have that information as well to add to frequently asked questions.
Super. I will make sure, by the way, that when I send out the email with the template attached and all of that sort of thing, that I also put the federal ID number for the grant on there, because I know a lot of you will need that. Trying to think. So that, let me just recap what will happen. So what will happen is you will get an email that by Friday, if not before, that has the template attached to it with the basic instructions. I will also attach to that the allowable uses chart that you already have, but and I will also include the link to the help desk And that'll be one of the emails you get. And then between now and early next week, you will also get an email that is going to have, it may be from ECCP. We're trying to get Karima onto that webpage. Onto that email address. But if that doesn't happen, it'll come from Karima Barnett directly. Just know that she's not the person to email back with questions or anything like that. Go to the help desk, because she's performing an admin function for me here. And that email will come out. That'll have the help desk link, but it will also have the summary of what the funds that you got in all of the different grant programs. So it won't just be for CRRSA, it will be all the grant programs. And so when we meet to talk about ARPA tomorrow, that one email with all the financial listings will be the same thing. I will also reattach an updated version of the informational memo to both of those emails. And that will show you when the virtual office hours are, what the due dates are, and the specific webinars that are related to each of the topics. So that if you want to jump on, and all of those will be posted as soon as possible onto the financial, under COVID-19 financial resources page on New Hampshire Connections.
Two final pieces. Is the quality grant under NHCIS tiles? I don't see it.
No, the only things that are in NHCIS that you applied for was CRRSA. You applied for through, that was our first one that we ever experimented with NHCIS with a grant application, and then ARPA, but only ARPA round 1, not ARPA round 2. So ARPA round 2 and ARPA round 2 and the CCDF discretionary you applied for was really a confirmation more than anything else through SurveyMonkey. So that is how you did that. That's why you don't see that tile.
And then there's a request, and then there's one more question. The request is that, could you send out an email letting people know the templates are coming and the new dates? And because as the number of providers are closed the week after Christmas.
Yes.
And then the question, if parents stopped paying us and left, is this covered? We did not go after them to get it back.
Within a reasonable time period. So for example, if your program, and it needs to be documented, if for example, the program that I run, we had a 2-week notice. You needed to provide us a 2-week notice, or you were subject to being billed for those 2 weeks, because we obviously needed to fill your child's space. If you gave us a 2-week notice, I'm trying to think, I can't remember if we charged you or not, but whatever your policy is. So yes, if somebody walked out and left you with no notice and holding a bill, yes, that's an income loss. But remember that income loss isn't related to COVID. So as an auditor, would they go back and say, well, look, you have people that walk all the time and leave you holding the bag and don't pay you money. What do you do in that situation? And you say, well, we go after them in small claims court. And in this particular case, you would say, well, it was during COVID and we made the decision that we knew these families were unemployed. And so we did not go after them for that amount. So just make sure that, again, you document it. You have to be able to explain your rationale. And I am, part of my job is to talk through those things with you. The things I can't give you advice on is legal advice. And I certainly can't give you tax advice. And you all know me well enough by now, since we've spent so much time over the last 2.5 years. I have an opinion on everything, but I won't give you my opinion on those. So I think, is there any, Donna, are we done with questions?
I think we're done with questions, and it is 1:03. So
yeah.
I think we can, if you do have other questions, I'm going to stop the recording. And I will leave this open for a second. So if you want to